Welcome to another episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. I am your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation. I grew up as an airplane nerd. On the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, we debrief some of the most fascinating and incredible pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. We want to hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from being in these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation environments? Our purpose is to illustrate how does the aviation world work, but more importantly, increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. Some of the stories that you're going to hear on the Lessons from the Cockpit Show are being told for the very first time. Our show is sponsored by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are 4, 6, and 8-foot vinyl graphics printed of your favorite aircraft, from World War II ME-109s all the way up to 5th gen fighters like the F-22 and F-35. Go to wallpilot.com and look at 147 ready to print right now graphics for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. Or let us do a custom one for you. Fill out a custom sheet. If there's a favorite airplane that you want with your name on it from a particular unit with a particular weapons load, go to wallpilot.com and fill out the custom sheet and we'll draw it up for you. Today's show is going to be a little different. It's going to be about aviation, lessons learned, but kind of some political stuff that's going on too. I was recently at Nellis Air Force Base and had an incredible briefing on a particular area of the world that's been in the news a lot lately. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit Show and talk about the People's Republic of China and some of the things that we're doing to offset their coercion and trying to gain an advantage in the Indo Pacific region. First of all, a couple of house cleaning items. I've been gone for a couple of weeks. There hasn't been any episodes published because I've been at Nellis Air Force Base, came home from that, went right to our family vacation at Moon Lake, which is out in eastern Utah, 8,400 feet, filled with trout. I am not a camper, but my wife's family is. As a matter of fact, her brother owns a very famous tent company, and so we always pack up there and with the family and have a reunion at this lake. And then this week, there's been a couple of weddings I had to attend. So that's why I've not posted anything for a while. But today's show is going to be a little different. Back a couple years ago, I started something that I called On the Nation's Dime. Dime is our government's way of kind of assessing where a country is. It's called the Elements of National Power. And those elements are diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. When we say informational, how much sway do they have around the world by the words that they say? Diplomatic, obvious. Military, obvious. Economic, obvious too. But that's kind of how we grade countries around the world, based on diplomatic, informational, military, economic, or as we call it, the dime. So I want to discuss with you something that happened while I was down in Las Vegas. And that is the 25th anniversary of the KC-135 Weapons School, the school that I helped create back in 1998, 1999, has now got 25 years under its belt. And I think the slide said 242 graduates now, which is really amazing. It's part of the Air Force's Weapons School, and I'm honored to be what they call a patch wearer. And folks, that means a lot to me that school has been going for 25 years, because obviously when we were standing it up, nobody wanted us. Nobody wanted us. It's amazing being hated by people in your own building Try being hated by two major commands in the United States Air Force, Air Combat Command and Air Mobility Command. Nobody wanted us. We were like the redheaded stepchild. You guys don't have weapons. What do you need a weapons school for? Because we needed people trained to do high ops tempo air refueling on a global scale. And now the school's been going for 25 years. During that 25-year anniversary, an intelligence officer from the 57th Wing gave us an unclassified briefing on China. And he was gracious enough to send me his slides. So I'm actually going to do the share screen thing here, which I've been trying to figure out for the last 2 days, and talk to you about what's going on in the Indo Pacific region and look at some of our national security documents. Now, just real quickly, the White House puts out what's called the National Security Strategy, came out in 2022. Then comes the National Defense Strategy, which is written by the Secretary of Defense. That document, the National Defense Strategy, is what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, uses to write the National Military Strategy. Mark Milley's now retired. Air Force General C.Q. Brown is now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And I'm going to use the one that Mark Milley wrote because that's the only one there is left. 2022 is when all of these documents were written. And I'm going to go through those just real quickly, just to kind of say, here's what our national leadership and how they view China. So in the National Security Strategy written by the White House, President Obama, President Biden, and his staff have written 3 major goals for the security strategy of the United States. Those 3 goals are obviously protect our vital interests. Okay. Second, protect our people and expand our economic prosperity and opportunities. The last one is obviously defend American values. Everything hinges on those 3 things. Now, each one of the documents talks about the 5 areas we need to work on. They are lethality, sustainability, resilience, survivability, and being agile and responsive. Those are the things that they want for our military. We have to be lethal, obviously, but we can also be non-lethal. And we're really, really good at non-lethal. When I say non-lethal, I'm talking like cyber warfare, electronic warfare, those kinds of things. Sustainable, if we get troops in the field, obviously you want to be able to bring the beans, butter, bullets, all those things over to the theater. Resilient goes without saying. Survivable, obviously we don't want to get a lot of our troops and equipment, shall we say, destroyed. And then agile and responsive is something that we truly are working on right now. How can we burst into a region and do it quickly so that our enemy has a hard time coping with that? And they did an exercise not too long ago where Air Mobility Command and some other groups of Marines and so forth burst into the Pacific region. And they tried to do it in like 48 hours. There were a lot of lessons learned from doing that. This was the first time, okay? I think they called it Millennial Challenge. But airplanes were supposed to show up from, say, Fairchild Air Force Base to Australia, like 12 tankers in 48 hours. Well, they ran into a few hiccups. So we're working on agile and responsive, and I think that's going to take a little while. Now, this show is about lessons learned. Here are a few things that they learned from Millennial Challenge and trying to like shock the Chinese by flowing into the Pacific. 1, diplomatic clearances. You would think that a lot of those things would be worked out. But once again, we're coming to countries that are hosting us. And sometimes getting diplomatic clearances takes a while. And believe it or not, some airplanes had to remain in Hawaii because some countries went, whoa, it takes 48 hours to get a diplomatic clearance. Some countries takes 5 days. So that's something that needs to be worked on. We found out aeromedical evacuation in the aeromedical region. Most of the nurses that are guardsmen and women, and reservists in the aeromedical evacuation arena are also in the medical arena back home. Well, when you take all of those aeromedical nurses, doctors, and everything and explode them into a region, who's at home to accept the casualties that are coming in? And believe me, if we go toe-to-toe with the Chinese, there's going to be casualties. You can't fight a World War II kind of war unless you have the ability to move patients, to keep them ambulatory or alive, and then get to the States and figure out, wait a minute, we've got a lot of our nurses in the Pacific that work in these hospitals. That was one of the things that we learned. So there are obviously a lot of others, like airspace. Obviously, you have to have airplanes in certain pieces of airspace. Now, creating that airspace is sometimes a problem. Around our bases in the Pacific, we have training airspace. But this is airspace of a different sort, because now you're tossing weapons around. And I want you to think about, what is it? $2 trillion of commerce goes through the South China Sea, through the Straits of Malacca, then past the bases that the Chinese have built in the South China Sea, and then, of course, into Japan and even across the ocean to the United States. What would happen if all of a sudden that airspace and sea space was contested, where you have air combat going on or weapons being dropped? How do you channel all of that somewhere else? And of course, what is the cost of it? How much is it going to cost the consumer goods to travel on the water or in the air farther because of some battle going on in the South China Sea? These are all the kinds of things that you have to think of when you're determining how do you prosecute any type of air campaign. And I'm just using the South China Sea as an example. Obviously, there's other things like Taiwan, our air base at Kadena, which I was stationed at, Guam, other things. And I'm going to show you some slides that depict how scary that really is. So our national security strategy under the Biden administration, national defense strategy under Secretary Lloyd Austin, and our national military strategy under then General Mark Milley, who's now retired, has a few things to say about the Indo Pacific region and specifically the People's Republic of China. And I've got some notes down here, so I'm going to read some of this, okay? In the National Defense Strategy, it says the most coercive, the most comprehensive and serious challenge to U.S. security, increasingly coercive and aggressive, is the People's Republic of China. And I want you to think of this definition given by General Karl von Clausewitz. His definition of coercion is, if the enemy is to be coerced, you must put him in a situation that is even more unpleasant than the sacrifice you are calling on him to make. Think about that. You have to put them in a situation that's even more unpleasant than the conditions of the end of the war that you're trying to make. Unconditional surrender of the Japanese during World War II, an example, but actually probably mistermed, because unconditional surrender means what, obviously? And how do you coerce an enemy to put him in a situation that's even more intolerable? During World War II, of course, it was the expenditure of nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was intolerable to the Japanese, intolerable to us too, but we would have lost a lot more people had we invaded. It also says refashion the Indo Pacific region and international system to suit the PRC's interests and authoritarian preference. It actually says in the National Defense Strategy, authoritarian. It goes to great lengths to say our fight is not with the Chinese people. It is with the Communist Chinese Party, the China Communist Party, CCP. And that's a term you've heard a lot, many, many times in the news. The CCP. Our fight is with the CCP, not the Chinese people. Now, here's why this is relevant and why I want to talk about this, particularly after having this briefing given to us by the 57th Wing Intelligence Group. And it was all unclassified. I'm not saying anything here that you can't find in open sources. But again, it says in the National Security Strategy, National Defense Strategy, and the National Military Strategy, the People's Republic of China, again, not the people, but the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, has expanded and modernized nearly every aspect of the People's Liberation Army with a focus on offsetting U.S. military advantage. Think about that. And of course, we've all heard about hypersonic missiles. They've got aircraft carriers. And I'm going to show you a slide that was in that deck that was pretty eye-opening, okay? But here's the last word in all three documents. In the National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, and the National Military Strategy, it says in all three documents, the People's Republic of China is therefore the pacing challenge to the DoD. Pacing challenge. Not Russia, not Iran, not terrorist groups, although they may be a part of it. Everything focuses on the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party. When we were getting briefed by the Intel folks and the KC-135 Weapons School Division, they told us that many of the scenarios for what's called advanced integration, this is where all of the weapons schools come together for 3 weeks and integrate together. Those scenarios are now based on Indo-Pacific Command with an enemy being China. They didn't say all of them. They said, I think most of them. And it just stands to reason when you read these things out of the National Security Strategy, National Defense Strategy, National Military Strategy. The PRC is therefore the pacing challenge for the DoD. Our number one focus of our military is the People's Republic of China. And the expanded and modernization nearly every aspect of the People's Liberation Army. That includes ground force, maritime force, and air force. So let's just get to the slides and talk about them. I was allowed to, as I mentioned, they sent these things to me, and they're unclassified, and I made sure that it says unclassified at the bottom of them. So I'm not sharing anything with you that is considered closed hold, okay? One thing I forgot. I'm going to include in this a white paper that was written by 2 Chinese colonels back in the 1990s. It's called Unrestricted Warfare. And I want to talk a little bit about that particular publication because that was written by these two PLA colonels with the focus of, we cannot go conventional military against the United States and win. And again, this is in the 1990s that this thing was written, okay? I think I've got in my notes here, the 17th of January, 1999 is when this thing was written and published. I challenge all of you to go online and download this book, Unrestricted Warfare. There's 15 modalities of war that are specifically mentioned in this. And I'll tell you what, I'll talk about that toward the end of this episode, because we're seeing those things now. China wants to humiliate the United States for 100 years. And the things that we're seeing in the news with all of the turmoil, divisiveness, everything comes right out of this book by these two colonels written in 1999. So we'll get to that here in just a second. Okay, so let's go to the slides. It's taken me 2 days to learn how to do this on Zoom, but I think it's going to work. You're going to see some things here. This is the first slide here. It's called the strategic slippery slope. And notice what it has here: assess, groom, consolidate, and control. In the assessment phase, study the nation's natural resources and markets. That's the very first thing they do. China doesn't have a lot of the natural resources they need to fight against the United States in a global war, particularly against our coalition partners. Recognize Taipei or Beijing. In other words, do they recognize Taiwan or they recognize Beijing? When they get into the groom stage, it's establish businesses, proliferate Confucius cultural centers, invite business leaders and journalists on free trips to China, charm them, establish academic associations, advertise benefits of Chinese investment loans, provide free military training and education in China, benign security equipment deals to police, military, and other security. Now, when you get to the consolidate stage, it's state-subsidized Chinese companies aggressively underbid the competition, sweetening the deals with bribes, graft, kickback arrangements for the powerful and the elites running the countries. High-level visits between presidents and ministers, loans, grants, deals signed initially with very low interest. Notice it says initially with low interest. China conditions deals on diplomatic recognition of Beijing. That's a big one. When they get to the control stage, that's when these loans to these countries are so astronomical that they can't possibly pay them back. They default on them, which allows Chinese workers to stay and establish private businesses. Where offered, China buys into citizenship by investment programs to create voting blocks, deepens ties with security services to create a dependency on China as a key supplier of training, education, and services. China solidifies ownership and physical control over strategic properties, especially related to the Silk Road infrastructure. China leverages its advantages to create unfettered access to its imports and exports and shipping and aircraft areas, influencing political outcomes of the host nation. Lock in its commercial penetration. Think about that. China advises suborned, co-opted, and beholden political elites on how best to support China's economic and geopolitical interests. Now, let's go to the next slide. China has invested more than $2.2 billion in maritime infrastructure, use of concessional loans and concessionary contracts, a concerning trend. Now, notice where all of this is. You see Guam on here, but look at where their interests are. Some of these smaller countries that want to invest in their infrastructure, particularly ports and airports. Why are those key? I can send my Navy ships and my Air Force airplanes into these small islands and basically encircle Guam, Papua New Guinea, 156 million in a concessional loan, and they were building a marine industrial zone and improving their port. Vanuatu, deepwater harbor for large cruise ships, 94 million in a concessional loan completed in 2017. Fishing process facility projects. Their fishing fleet goes all throughout this region, which is why they want a fishing processing plant in Vanuatu. In Tonga, a wharf upgrade that cost 104 million, completed in 2024. French Polynesia, provide access to protected anchorages and boat harbors, 380 million China Development Bank concessional loan with a 99-year max lease term. 99 years. Next, let's look at airports. Oh, let me go back to ports real quick. I want you to look at this slide. Seeks global network of ports by 2030 to support Chinese interests. Notice that there's two dots in America, in the States, San Diego and Seattle. They've already bought a pier in San Diego, is what he told us. I think he called it Pier 17, and they're looking to buy one in Seattle. Why do the Chinese need a complete pier in two of our western states' largest harbors? And think about Seattle, because you've got the Navy station at Bremerton, where we have nuclear submarines. And I think one of our aircraft carriers is also stationed there. I can't remember if it's the Stennis or the Ronald Reagan. No, Reagan's in Japan. One of our carriers is up there, but that's a very strategic base. And of course, Whidbey Island, the naval station there, has all of our electronic jamming airplanes. The EF-18 Growler are all there. That's a little concerning. So, but look at all these ports all around the world on these slides. Look at it in Europe. Look at it in Africa, South America, Central America. Look at it in the Persian Gulf. They've already got one near our base in Djibouti, and they just finished a deep water port in Cambodia where some of their Navy ships just recently visited port. Here's the other thing that concerns most people about Polynesia. The Solomon Islands. That's a base we built in World War II. And this captain that was briefing us has told us the Solomon Island government no longer wants anything to do with the American government. A place that we basically repatriated and freed from the Japanese now doesn't want to have anything to do with the Americans, period. That's what they're trying to do, is edge us out in a lot of these regions. Madagascar, here's one in Brazil. All over the world, the Chinese want to put these bases. Now, let's go to the next slide. China has invested more than 1.8 billion, and Chinese companies have been awarded a significant portion of contracts for airport infrastructure projects. Let's look at some of the states. Federated States of Micronesia, 4.9 million government grant completed in 2007. Papua New Guinea, newly constructed runway, 1,500 meters longer. 21.2 million Asian Development Bank concessionary loan. That was completed last year. Vanuatu, major runway and safety upgrades to airfields there. completed in 2019. Samoa, terminal upgrade, runway resurface, navigation aids, and lighting. $61 million Chinese Exim Bank concessional loan, completed 2019. And then Kiribati on Canton Island Airport, extensive remodel of 1,900-meter runway there. That means fighters and big airplanes, to include potentially bombers. Next slide. China has invested more than $195 million in government infrastructure, largely through grants. Again, look at the different states that we're talking about here. Federated States of Micronesia, new state administrative building, official residence for the president. Remember what it said on the slippery slope? We're going to go to the leadership and we're going to start stroking them. Vanuatu, the prime minister's new office complex, $9.6 million governmental grant. New president's office, Ministry of Finance building, Foreign Affairs building, $27 million. Secretariat, I know what MSG means, but look again in Samoa. And you would think, wait a minute, Samoa is one of our closest allies. Maybe not anymore, which is terrible. Government office complex, $52 million concessional loan. Parliamentary and MJCA complex, $21 million concessional loan. National Medical Center, $59 million. And again, in Tonga, St. George Palace office block, $11 million grant to build that. Next, this kind of gives you an overview of where they're all at. New airfield in Polynesia, Tonga, new buildings, Papua New Guinea. We had a big presence there during World War II. Notice they all are near our big base in Guam. That Anderson Air Force Base, the port there on the island of Guam, that you can put an aircraft carrier in because it has at least a 50-foot draft. That island scares them, the Chinese. Whenever we send our bombers into the South China Sea, the B-1s, B-2s, B-52s that do kind of a show of force exercise, they always come out of Guam. The tankers come out of Guam. Aircraft carriers in Guam, submarines in Guam. Remember the strategy that MacArthur used in his island hopping, where he just would go take the islands and the Japanese would die on the vine? That's kind of what you're seeing here. Next, this is pursuing arrangements for additional Chinese basing. Here's some of the places that they're looking at. Tunisia, Tajikistan, the Wakhan corridor in Afghanistan. And remember, when we left Afghanistan, who took over Bagram Air Base? The Chinese did. The port in the United Arab Emirates, Pakistan, has a number of places they want to get into. Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, the Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea again, Fiji, the Seychelles. How many of you know that we actually operated some of our MQ-9 Reaper drones from the Seychelles around the Horn of Africa? Equatorial Guinea, Nigeria. These are all interests that the Chinese have in basing at these places. Next. This one should concern all of us, allowing for espionage and military ops outside the confines of international treaties. Let me say that again. Allows for espionage and military ops outside the confines of international treaties. This is the, what is it called? Office 110 project. Notice on this map, there are offices in Ottawa and New York. An office that allows espionage and military ops outside the confines of international treaties in New York, Brazil, Argentina, Madagascar, UAE, India. There's even one down in Australia. There's a number of them in around Europe. These offices have Chinese military folks in them, and they can go in the United States, are in the United States, and are watching some of these dissidents, Chinese dissidents, and what they're doing. And that office, again, allows for espionage and military ops outside the confines of international treaties. They have one of these offices in New York and in Ottawa. Now, this slide is really fascinating. This shows a military comparison of the United States and China in 1999. Each satellite icon that you see up there is equivalent to 10 satellites. Each fighter you see is 25 modern fighters. Each bomber you see is 25 manned bombers. 5 special mission airplanes, 2 modern subs, 1 aircraft carrier. And then, of course, it's got amphibious assault and multi-warfare combatants. That's their Sovereignty-class destroyers. This is 1999. Look at this. Look at the area of influence throughout the Pacific. Now, let's go to current. Remember, I told you they are increasing the PLA to offset the U.S.'s advantage. They have a 3rd aircraft carrier fitting out and a 7th large deck amphib fitting out. Look at the number of bombers, look at the number of fighters. That includes their J-20, Mighty Dragon, the one that's all black, that's supposed to be the carrier killer. It's supposed to be like our F-22, although I doubt it. Our airplanes have one advantage, particularly our fighter planes, and that is engines. They have not been able to co-opt our engine technology, and apparently they have a lot of engine technical problems. But again, look at the comm, nav, ISR, and science and tech satellite constellations that they have. Remember, each one of those satellite icons is 10 satellites. Each one of those bombers, 25 manned bombers. Each one of those fighters, 25 fighters, compared to ours over here. Now, let's go to 2025. This is projected. This is a year out. Well, less than a year, half a year. Notice the number of fighters and the increase. Bombers did not. Fighter aircraft did. Now they have 4 carriers. Now they have 8 amphibs, numerous multi-purpose ships and submarines. And of course, you can see ICBMs, medium-range ballistic missiles, short-range ballistic missiles. All of those are pointed at Guam and Kadena compared to what we have. And remember, we're downsizing. There's only 3 KC-10s left at Travis, and those will be gone, I think, by next month. We have the KC-46, but you know, we've had issues with the KC-46. I would have not have let the KC-10s retire, and they've been retiring KC-135s. If you've got this vast distance that you have to put your air forces across and naval forces, you need tankers. This is a lot of gas to cover all of this area. And you can see it extends all the way out to beyond Guam to Micronesia. This should be concerning to everyone. Now, here's a slide that has U.S. security interests impacted by China's growing influence, benign and malign. Here's the whole thing. See the red dotted lines? Those are routes for Chinese naval shipping. The cross-hatching you see is fishing areas that they want to secure. Fortunately, none of them are up by the United States. But look at the Pacific. And you know that many islands, nations in the Pacific rely on their fishing industry. This is a pretty scary slide. And one that, when they put it up, everybody's kind of like going, wow. And there's a few gasps in the room. Again, this is all unclassified. You can see the comm networks, like up in the islands north of Scandinavia. They've got one in Canada. But what really concerns me is San Diego and Seattle. They're trying to get and have purchased a pier in San Diego. And he didn't say if there was one in Seattle, but still, that's worrisome. And then you've got that one office in New York. I saw in the news the other day, they think that there are 120,000 Chinese military-age males that have come across our southern border as illegal aliens. Where have they all gone? Have they been tracked? Can we find them? And what is their purpose for being here? That's something we got to figure out soon, real soon. So the People's Republic of China is our challenge, our pacing challenge, as it says in these documents. And what are we doing to prepare? I want to tell you an interesting story. We've been preparing since I left the Air Force. I was at the Operational Test and Evaluation Center in 2007, and one of the projects that I was working on was called AMSTE, Affordable Moving Surface Target Engagement is what it stood for. And the E8 Joint Stars folks were trying to figure out, how do we send messages to a joint direct attack munition to allow it to sink a ship? And that was one of the packages, as a matter of fact, the thickest package on my desk. And they said, hey, this is a big deal, because at that time, the deputy commander of Pacific Air Forces, who was Lieutenant General Dave Deptula, says, we got to figure this out. We got to figure out how to do this. And he came to the Operational Test and Evaluation Center to figure out, okay, what do you guys think? We had a really, really in-depth intelligence brief, which to me was kind of interesting, because of the information that top secret brief had in it. I was surprised at how much we actually knew about what the Chinese were going to do, how they were going to do it, and how they were going to marshal their forces if they ever invaded Taiwan. And of course, the only way they can get there is either by air or sea across the Formosa Straits. And General Deptula wanted us to figure out, all right, if they come by sea, how are we going to do this? So we did what's called a JTD, a Joint Technology Demonstration. And I'm going to show you a video clip here in a little bit that was done recently. But we were able to figure out how to drop a 2,000-pound joint direct attack munition from a B-52 bomber and drop it on a moving ship. It happened to be the ex-USS Schenectady, a landing like an amphibious ship. And they hit it fore, amidship, and aft, and basically broke it into 3 pieces. So we were able to figure this out pretty quickly, by gathering all the sources. But of course, if you're fighting on the surface of the ocean, then you got to figure out how you're going to include the Navy. And there was command and control issues and targeting issues and everything that need to be worked out, which hopefully they've done by now. But it was a very successful test that we did with in conjunction with the Navy. So obviously, the Air Force trying to sink ships, I thought, I'd be willing to bet the Navy's got something like this. And we traveled out to Coronado Island to the Surface Warfare Development Group, SWEDG. And guess what? Sure enough, they had a program. It was called the Joint Surface Warfare Initiative, or JSU, okay? We combined our resources with the Navy, and it was very successful. And we kind of worked through some of the initial problems of, okay, who's controlling all this? And you have an air component commander, you have a maritime commander. Who's the daddy rabbit when we're sinking ships? Well, that's the maritime commander. Well, that's the Navy admiral of the battle group that has the hammer on that. Or, as they call him, the CIFMIC, the Combined Forces Maritime Component Commander. And that may be the admiral from Yokosuka, more than likely. But again, who's going to command and control it? Is the AWACS going to do it? Is the E-2 Hawkeye going to do it? Who's going to launch the weapons? All those things we had to think about while we're doing this. But I want to show you a few things that we have been working on in our U.S. military for quite a while in order to be able to sink ships. So I actually made a few videos that I'm going to share with you here on the show so that you can see some of this new technology that we're working on. And then the last thing I want to talk about is this 1999 paper that was published by these two PLA colonels called Unrestricted Warfare. Because I'm telling you, every one of you should download that thing and read it, because we're living it right now. We are absolutely living this unrestricted warfare document right now. And you'll see when I bring up what's called the 15 modalities of war that it talks about inside unrestricted warfare and what this means. Let me take a few minutes to show you some of the things that joint technology demonstrations and some of the things that we're doing to offset what's happening with the Chinese military. Sharing my screen once again. You have all of these ships, military ships, that are transports, aircraft carriers. You saw from that slide all of the all-purpose ships, destroyers, patrol boats, things like that. We have in the Air Force the AGM-158, Joint Standoff Air-to-Surface Missile, or JASSM. There is also a shipboard version of that. And let me run this video for you showing what's called the Long Range Anti-Ship Missile, or LRASM. Slowly, you'll see the missile doing its thing right there. Here it is, full speed, and that has about 170-mile range, can be dropped from F-18s, can be dropped from B-1s, B-52s. That is an extremely good long-range anti-ship missile that the Air Force and the Navy and the Marine Corps too has at its disposal. Next one I want to show you. It's called Rapid Dragon. And Rapid Dragon was another technology exploration to figure out how can we put more weapons to bear on our enemies. We have aircraft like you see here, the MC-130, C-17s, C-130s, C-5s, a lot of mobility aircraft that we can probably use as a platform for releasing these LRASMs or JASSMs, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. So let me start this one, and it shows an MC-130 off the coast of Norway, and they're doing what's called the Rapid Dragon test. The capability and the technology is nicknamed Rapid Dragon. Here we go. There's the extraction chute coming out. There's the pallet coming out with its 3 parachutes, which causes it to upend correctly, and then release the missiles. They come in boxes of 4. And again, this thing has like 170 nautical mile range. So now any C-17, C-130, heaven knows how many pallets you could put in a C-5, can drop this Rapid Dragon pallet and take out targets. Next one. I mentioned to you that I had worked on how do I take a JDAM like this 2,000-pound GBU-31, which is a Mark 84 bomb body, and make it into an anti-ship weapon. Well, they have a program that they started called QuickSync, and this is video from that particular weapons test, joint technology demonstration. You can see the F-15E is carrying 4 of these, and these obviously are very accurate as you watch. Watch what it does to this ship. It literally blows it in half. You can see it being blown in half, but then the camera topples over and goes into the water. This is the kind of technology that we'll have to have in order to stop all of these Chinese ships from coming across. Break, break, break. This is where the washing machine finally went off. Now let me show you the Rapid Dragon package. It's in the back of an MC-130. This is a test off the coast of Scandinavia and I think it's called the Andola Range. And they have targets set up all across the range. And this particular package coming out of the MC-130 carries 4 of the JASMs or LRASMs. I'm not sure which one was in the back of it. I'm pretty sure they're JASM, the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile. And it was very successful. So there's a recent Pentagon release that says we're going to reshape the Pacific. One of the things that they're going to do is put a new airplane in Okinawa at Kadena, where I used to be based. We used to have 3 F-15 squadrons. They're all gone. They're all C and D squadrons. This is the airplane that they're going to send there. This is the F-15EX that has additional external hardpoints. This is the airplane actually flying through the Star Wars Canyon. Here's all the stuff that it can carry. New engines. It's got the GE engines, not the Pratt & Whitney engines. They put on a terrific air show. And here's the cockpit. It's all glass. It's an all glass cockpit. Notice it's all touchscreen, a lot like the F-35. Doesn't have the big wide angle HUD that you see in the F-15E, but the pilot is wearing the joint helmet mounted cueing system. And you can see it's got the attitude ADI, it's got the sensors in the middle, and then it could be a weapons page or a systems page on the other side. And you'll notice that far to the right, it looks like the fuel, and it shows it by tank. And then you've got the standby attitude down off the left knee, but it looks like all the other stuff is pretty much the same as you would see in an F-15E. Now, I notice it looks like there are other portions of displays at the bottom of the big display. And then, of course, you've got push buttons across the top. You know, it said TACAN off, ILS off, you know, for landing, and a number of other things. And remember, this is all hands-on throttle and stick too. And the pilot wearing the joint helmet mounted cueing system or some advanced version of it makes this airplane extremely lethal. But it also can carry up to 12 AMRAAM missiles. Now, this is also a fascinating development that has come out just recently. The F-15EX will probably be able to carry nuclear weapons. This is the B-61-12. The B-61 nuclear bomb has been around for a very long time. This is the 422nd test testing that weapon. Watch as it comes off. You can hear the sound. Watch it spin up. It's got little rockets that spin the thing up. So it's like falling like a football, which makes it extremely more accurate. Now, let's go to the next slide here. This video shows the Navy's SM-6 missile. It's normally a ship-launched missile. It has been extremely effective in fighting the Houthis down in the Gulf of Aden and in the Red Sea. This is what it looks like when it comes out of a ship. It comes out really fast. Now you are going to see them on F-18s. This is a China Lake shot where they're testing it. You can see it's a big missile. You'll see a comparison with AMRAAM here in a minute. There it is on a VFA 195 Golden Dragons. Again, here's the size of it. It is a big missile compared to the AMRAAM that you see there. They've also got a launch box that goes on the back of the new littoral combat ships that raises the missile up in a container, and actually you can launch them from the back of the different littoral ships that are also in the Navy. This is a very versatile missile because it can hit satellites, it can hit other airplanes, like an air-to-air missile, it can hit cruise missiles, it can hit drones. And last week, they actually had the Army guide an SM-6 launched from a Navy ship, which tells me that this missile, when it's launched from an F-18 Super Hornet, can be guided by probably AWACS, certainly the E-2 Hawkeye, and ground-based radars. It has 200-mile range, but launched from an F-18 at, say, 36,000 feet, going 0.8 Mach, it may have up to 350-mile range. If you put a line from the center of Taiwan and stretch it out 350 miles, that covers just about every Chinese base that would be involved with the invasion of Taiwan. Now, next, one of the upgrades that they're doing to the F-35 is they're putting B-61s on it also. The Pentagon reshaping of the Pacific, I believe the number was 48 F-35s would replace the F-16s at Misawa. That's at least 3 really strong squadrons, possibly 4, with 12 airplanes each at one place. And of course, the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force is flying F-35s now also. Here is the test of the F-35 releasing a B-61 inert nuclear bomb. And this is one of the things that was specifically stated in some of the recent upgrades to the Pacific was, if we're going to put F-35s over there, they've got to be able to drop B-61s. So those are just some of the things that we're trying to do militarily to offset what's going on in the Pacific. And this is good. This is good stuff. I like the fact that we're putting F-15EXs back at Kadena. Wouldn't it be great to see the 12th, 44th, and 67th Fighter Squadrons back in business again? Now, I mentioned to you this. This is directly from the book called Unrestricted Warfare. These 2 Chinese colonels said, warfare, and again, this is 1999, warfare in the future may not have military against military because we, as the Communist Chinese Party and the People's Liberation Army, cannot go toe-to-toe with the Americans. We can't do it. They have not fought a war since 1979 when they tried to invade a portion of North Vietnam. And the 2 weeks that they were fighting there went very badly. Our military has been anxiously engaged in the global war on terror for over 20 years. We know how to deal with IEDs. We know how to deal with tanks. We know how to deal with air threats, drones, all those kinds of things. But what you see here, these 15 modalities of warfare, is completely different. This is warfare amongst a population. And he said, these two Chinese colonels said, that if we're going to do unrestricted warfare, that means civilian populations are now on the battlefield. You have to have cultural conflict, economic warfare, environmental warfare, financial, illegal drugs, international law, information and media, telecommunications and networks, political, psychological, resource, smuggling, technology, terrorists, and gangs. According to unrestricted warfare, these are all on the playing field if we ever go to war against the Chinese. I have said to you before, I felt that we were in the early stages of a third world war. Look at these 15 modalities of warfare. Environmental. Have you seen the no oil folks super gluing themselves to roads so that people can't move? That's environmental conflict. Illegal drugs. The fentanyl problem we have here in the United States is directly connected to illegal drugs. International law. The International Court just condemned Israel for occupying Palestine. That's the kind of international lawfare you can expect. You can also expect lawfare here in the United States. Information and media. I don't think a whole lot of people trust the mainstream media in the United States anymore. And believe it or not, the best coverage of President Trump's attempted assassination has been from the BBC and Sky News in Australia. They have been bulldogging this story, trying to find out information that our mainstream media doesn't seem to want to get into. Telecommunications and networks. This is all cyber. Cyber warfare is huge in China against the United States. Political unrest. Look what's going on in the United States right now. You have one candidate who's climbing in the polls because of a recent attempt on his life, and the other candidate being asked by many of his colleagues, you need to leave. And remember, the slide I showed you earlier, the slippery slope, says they'll buy off, bribe politicians. There's been a lot of that in the news where the current administration is concerned. Psychological. Let's talk about smuggling. Human trafficking is like billions of dollars. I think somebody told me human trafficking is like $32 billion a year industry. And industry may be the wrong thing, but smuggling people right now is huge. Terrorists, we've been engaged against terrorists for a long time. Gang warfare. There's a number of gangs that have been coming across our southern border, not just from South America, but from other places too. Economic warfare. The dollar has been weakened, which of course affects financial. All of these things are tied together. All of these modes of warfare are postulated in this PLA white paper, Unrestricted Warfare. Folks, you can go download this white paper on the web and read it from these two colonels. And it's chilling. And you can see a lot of these are being used against the United States right now. And not from just China, from other places too. These 15 modalities of warfare. Do you understand why I say now we're in a world war already? Early stages, we're not in a full conflict yet, but Israel and Hamas sure are. The Houthis against the economic viability of not only Israel, but the United States, we sure are. Go back and look what the USS Eisenhower Battle Group, Carrier Strike Group, just accomplished on a 9-month deployment. That's one of the longest deployments since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, when the USS Abraham Lincoln was out for 10 months. And they were able to accomplish a lot. Shoot down a lot of drones, shoot down a lot of cruise missiles, take out a lot of ballistic missiles. But I saw recently that the CENTCOM commander has sent a letter to Secretary Lloyd Austin saying, our fight against the Houthis has been a failure because we didn't unleash the full weight and power of the United States military there in the Red Sea. I have not seen a copy of the letter. I've only heard about it, but I've heard about it from 3 different sources. So I know it's true. And that is pretty ballsy of a general to send something like that to his boss or his boss's boss. Folks, this was a very different episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. I know that. There was flying, there was surface warfare ships, there were missiles, all kinds of stuff I talked about. And then again, the 15 modalities of warfare. So please go download, and I'll put the links to these in the notes, to the 2022 National Security Strategy, National Defense Strategy, National Military Strategy, and to Unrestricted Warfare, so that you have one place you can go to download all these. Folks, thanks for joining me today on the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. I really do appreciate all of you coming by my YouTube channel and listening in and watching. This was the first time I've ever included visuals, video. It was kind of a mess in my opinion, but it makes the show a lot better. I really appreciate you coming by, downloading and listening to this episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. It is brought to you and financially supported by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. Go by wallpilot.com and see 147 ready to print from World War II all the way up to 5th gen fighters. 4, 6, and 8 feet printed on vinyl you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. Or come to us for a custom order of your favorite airplane. We can put your name on it from whatever unit you want, whatever weapons load that you want, and fill out the form that tells us this is what you want on your drawing, and we'll do it. Those are a little bit more expensive. Okay, a 4-footer custom is $300. A 4-footer ready to print is $100. But you can see the one behind me here. That's 8874. That used to be my airplane. We were at Kadena. Again, I thank all of you for coming by my YouTube channel. We are over, I think, 112 million views since February 2nd of this year. And I think we're around 175,000 subscribers. So again, thank you for coming by. Also, if you go to Lessons from the Cockpit Show on YouTube, you can sign up for my All Ranks Club. That's kind of like my Patreon. $8 a month or $80 a year. I send you prints like this, chapters that didn't show up in my book, and you're the first ones to get a notification via email or by text that, hey, there's a new show up. The other thing that I do is I spend time with you one-on-one on a Zoom meeting, just like I'm doing here. This is being recorded on Zoom. And those have been really fun, talking to folks that have become members of the All Ranks Club. And we're working on a coin for all of the members that we'll send out, and probably here in a couple of months. Thanks again for joining me on the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. Next week we have Eric Z from Berlin, who is a sailplane and hang glider. And he's going to tell us some of his lessons learned on the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. Thanks again, folks. Talk to you again next week.